You know, a number of months ago, I did a podcast on the Wayne Mackey, Ted Green incident. A lot of people have commented and followed that podcast. Now, I'm not doing this, not say sequel, but this second style of story for cheap hits. I think it's a story that needs to be told because it happened, more than 40 years ago, and still remains one of the most disgusting moments in NHL history. Now, it involves Henry Boucha, who at the time of the injury was one of the most celebrated and recognized First Nations hockey player of his generation. Now, born in Warroad, Minnesota, which was his hometown, eventually was inducted to the United States Hockey Hall of Fame in 1995. Now, he came to major prominence for playing with Warroad High School that lost to Adina in the '69 Minnesota High School State Tournament Finals. But eventually played on Team USA as an 18-year-old at the 1970 IIHF World Championship Pool B Tournament in Romania after taking part in 6 pre-tournament games with the squad. He was only the only under 20 player to make the team. Now, he scored 4 goals in that tournament, helped him advance to Group A, and they won eventually a well-deserved silver at the Olympics in 1972. Now, he took time off from his military duty to play for the squad. Now, he was eventually drafted in the second round, 16th overall, by Detroit, and had a good start to his career. He also was part of one of the biggest trades in Minnesota history as he picked up Danny Grant in a trade for him on October 27th, 1974. Now, the incident occurred on January 4th, 1975, late in the first period of Minnesota's 8-0 home loss to Boston. Now, Boucher was viciously attacked by Bruins left winger Dave Forbes, who jammed the butt end of his stick directly in the area above Boucher's right eye. And from there, a legal and criminal situation transpired that still hasn't been cerebrally settled, still basically talked about with disdain. Now, the brutal attack by Forbes opened up a gash on Boucher's face that required nearly 30 stitches just to close. Now, Boucher was a strong left winger, right winger, not scared of puck, not scared to go in the corners, not scared to stand up to himself. And this is why it happened. The incident was related to some bad blood between the players that had developed earlier in the period. At 8:22 of the first, Forbes had fouled Boucher, and both players had received 7 minutes in penalties. Forbes' Boston teammate Terry O'Reilly, of all people, had also jumped into that fight and was tossed from the game for joining it. Now, just under 16 minutes in the period, Boucher and Forbes exited the penalty boxes at the same moment. As soon as they came out of the boxes, Forbes tried to goad Boucher into a second fight. Boucher would have none of it, so Forbes, holding his stick in his right hand, reached around to punch Boucher and caught the side of Boucher's face with the butt end of his stick rather than his glove. Boucher, who did not see Forbes' sticks coming, fell to the ice in a heap. Forbes then jumped on him and began punching defenseless Boucher until the linesman separated the players. Boucher had to be rushed to the hospital to attend to the area around his right eye. Reports after the game said that Forbes had been heard yelling at Boucher as he sat in the penalty boxes and that he had made threats saying he would get him once the penalties ended. Forbes was thrown out of the game, and the NHL subsequently began investigating the incident. Given the ferocity of Forbes' blow, it was only luck that saved Boucher from a far more serious injury. I thought my eye was gone, he later said in published reports. Doctors said that Forbes would have indeed destroyed the vision of Boucher's eye if the stick had connected just 1/2 inch lower. Forbes phoned Boucher in the hospital the next day to apologize for what he had done, but Boucher refused to comment on the apology when he was released from hospital. Meanwhile, the incident drew enough attention to arouse concerns from local law enforcement at a time when hockey violence in general seemed to be out of control. Now, on January 7, 1975, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office announced it was investigating Forbes' actions to determine if he could be charged for a crime. On January 11th, Boucher had surgery to correct a double vision problem and eye socket fracture that resulted from the injury, and the North Stars announced that he would be out longer than initially expected. That same day, Hennepin County Attorney Gary Flackney announced that the Forbes case would be presented to a grand jury to determine if charges could be filed. On January 14th, then NHL President Clarence Campbell held a 7-hour hearing in Minneapolis involving Forbes and Boucha, who was in no condition to fly to Montreal. Campbell acknowledged that the league did not have sufficient video evidence of the incident to know exactly what had happened. After Campbell met with the players, word got out that a Hennepin County grand jury had indicted Forbes on a felony charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and the Bruins player would have to stand trial in Minnesota. The maximum penalty could be up to 10 years in prison, and on January 15th, as Flakeney prepared to announce a charge against Forbes, Campbell announced a 10-game suspension without pay for Forbes. He would be suspended for 9 games and also kept out of the next game between the Bruins and the North Stars in Minnesota. Now, Bruins general manager Harry Sinden argued vehemently that the punishment was too harsh for a first-time offender like Forbes, and Bruins players threatened to boycott the 1975 NHL All-Star Game, but Campbell held firm. "This is one of the most vicious incidents I have ever been called upon to deal with," Campbell wrote in explaining the decision. Forbes' attorney, Joseph Keogh, said that the 10-game suspension would bias any potential jury before the criminal case began. Forbes said only that the Boucher injury was an accident, as he said he meant to hit Boucher from behind with his hand, not his stick, and asked teammates not to boycott the All-Star Game, although he appreciated their desire to support him. On January 17th, the criminal charges became official, as Forbes were charged with aggravated assault with a dangerous weapon, punishable by a minimum of 3 years in prison and a maximum of 5 years, and a $5,000 fine. On January 20th, Boston coach Pep Guillermo asked Campbell if Forbes could play in the NHL All-Star Game to replace the injured Johnny Busick. Their requests were sharply denied. On January 24th, Forbes appeared before a Hennepin County judge and pled not guilty. Forbes was told to return to the court in Minneapolis on May 19th for a pre-trial hearing that his attorneys requested. On May 19th, after the hearing, Judge Stanley Kane set a July 7th start date for Forbes' jury trial. Forbes' trial received widespread media coverage because no athlete in American professional sports had ever been previously faced criminal prosecution for an in-game act. The jury for the trial consisted of 7 men and 5 women, none of whom said they knew much about hockey. Opening remarks began on July 9th. Ironically, by the time the trial began, Boucher had already signed with the Minnesota Fighting Saints to spend the 76th season in the WHA. Witnesses include NHL linesman John Brown, Boucher himself, the penalty box timekeeper, the scoreboard operator, and North Star player Murray Oliver, who said Forbes used his stick as an extension of his fists. The prosecution worked hard to establish that Forbes had threatened Boucher in the penalty box and carried out his threats on the ice. Boucher also testified that he continued to suffer from double vision that impacted his performance. 3 other witnesses, including the public address announcer, testified that they had seen Boston coach Don Cherry congratulated Forbes by putting his arm around him and patting him on the back when he skated back to the bench after Boucher was injured. Ken Hodge was also said to have been very congratulatory of Forbes. Now on July 15th, Campbell testified in front of the jury, discussing the events of the January 14 hearing in which Forbes had admitted to hitting Boucher in the eye with his stick. Campbell also said that he did not believe Forbes had ever intended to injure Boucher in such a severe way and that Forbes had been entirely honest with him about what had happened. He could not explain why Forbes had not dropped his stick before challenging Boucher to fight. The defense made Don Cherry's first witness, and Cherry admitted to having encouraged his players to be more physical during a road trip that involved the January 4th game. Cherry said he was worried about losing his job on that road trip, and the players were feeding off his intense desire to win. Cherry basically said he also said, it's always been my philosophy to win at all costs. Sorry about that. Now, Cherry also said he patted Forbes on the back after the incident as a show of compassion, since Forbes was immediately remorseful and practically in tears as Boucher was taken off the ice. Cherry said he went back to the dressing room with Forbes, whose sense of guilt was overwhelming. He said Forbes wanted to go to the hospital with Boucher. On July 16, Forbes himself testified, arguing vehemently that he did not intend to injure Boucher and that the contact with his stick was accidental. He was adamant that he had not used his butt end of the stick as a deliberate weapon and had never intended to do so. Forbes said he was angry at Boucher over a sucker punch in the earlier fight, which was why he had been yelling at him in the penalty box, but he had no intention of inflicting the kind of damage that resulted from his punch. He said he was trying to engage Boucher in another fight when the injury was inflicted. After Forbes' testimony, defense attorneys argued that Forbes was only being prosecuted because he was a member of the visiting team and that no Minnesota player would have been charged in similar fashion. The case went to the jury, and eventually, after 7 hours of deliberation, jurors emerged on July 17th and told Judge Ralph Facine that they were having difficulty reaching a verdict. They resumed their deliberations on July 18th. Late on the evening of Friday, July 18th, the jury announced that it could not reach a unanimous verdict. The final vote among the jurors had been 9-3 in favor of conviction or on simple assault charges. The maximum penalty for that would have been 90 days in jail and a $300 fine. 3 of the male jurors had told the other jurors they would never vote to convict Forbes of anything. The judge declared a hung jury, and prosecutors were offered the option of retrying Forbes at a later date. On August 12th, the date to make such a decision, Flakeney announced that the prosecutors would not press further, since the first trial had shown how difficult it would be to get a conviction. Flakeney then requested that a court dismiss the case. Sadly, the actual legacy of the Forbes attack was the damage it did to Boucher's hockey career. The double vision problem never fully corrected itself, and Boucher would only play 36 more games in the WHA and 37 more in the NHL before he opted to retire at age 25. In January 76, months after the Forbes case was dropped, Boucher filed a $3.5 million lawsuit against the NHL, the Bruins, and Forbes in Michigan's Wayne County Circuit Court. The suit asked for $2.5 million in compensatory damages and $1 million in punitive damages. He also sued the Red Wings in order to get the case into Wayne County, arguing that the Red Wings were also liable for his injury because they were part of the league. The lawsuit was eventually settled out of court on August 26, 1980. So Boucher's situation with Forbes is a cautionary tale. Sometimes back in the day, players would have put tape on a butt end of the stick or use it as a weapon. Certain sticks were a little bit heavier towards the blade for slashing. But was Boucher a dirty player? Was Forbes a dirty player? Forbes was known as a defensive specialist. Boucher was more concerned with scoring than fighting. But hockey in the 1970s, again, it was a rough sport. Now, Boucher had a very interesting career. The reason why the WHA was interesting, because literally the first person, one of the first people in Minnesota Fighting Saints drafted in the 72 WHA draft was him. Now with Detroit, he played on a big line with Red Berenson and Bill Collins, and also he has been an active supporter, of course, of Native American causes and charities throughout his life. And Al Hanks Brazen, Hanks Laban was a teammate with Warroad. Now, he was on Detroit's top penalty killing unit with Bill Collins during the 73 season, and as part of his activism against violence, he also testified before Congress on September 30th, 1980, about the problem of violence in sport. Now, he's also a published author, as his book, Henry Boucher, Native American Olympian, was brought to press in 2013. Like I said, 2 years in the Army, and again, served there and played hockey at the same time. Now, he was also part of the Kansas City, Colorado franchise in the mid-1970s. Now, he's also been a coach, as he worked as an instructor in hockey schools during his off seasons. Now, he's also subject of a biography, Henry Boucher, Star of the North, which was published in 1999. Now, he also played senior hockey in Warroad before the Olympics, and was also named the 47th most important sports figure in Minnesota history by the Minneapolis Star Tribune. Now, Boucher, the raw stats don't tell the whole story. I think it's something maybe quickly to look at. Now, it's available on Wikipedia, Internet Hockey Database, but Last season with Railroad in '69, he had 95 points in 25 games, and continued that great play in 1970 with the Winnipeg Jets in the WCHL, where he had 33 combined goals in 65 regular season and playoff games. First season with Red Wings, had 1 goal in 16 games. Rookie season, 28 points in 73 games. Detroit almost hit the 20-goal mark in '74 before the Danny Grant trade, and Minnesota in '75, 29 points in 51 games. Now with Minnesota Fighting Saints in '76, he had 29 points in 51 games before he shifted back to Kansas City with 11 points in 28 games, and of course wrapped up with Colorado in 1977. So final NHL totals. The Rookie of the Year for '73 for Detroit, 102 points in 247 games, 53 goals, 35 points in 36 WHA games, including 15 goals. And the United States, again, Hockey Hall of Famer in '95, mostly for those 3 back-to-back World Championships in Olympic over 3 series, 13 goals, 19 points in 23 games. But big drink of water as a center, 6 feet 195, and again, who would have known what his career would have been like were he not injured? It's hard enough to play hockey, but with double vision. And you see, I'm not judging the incident, but Forbes should have backed off. Nowadays, he's jawing in the penalty box. Maybe a linesman or one of the 2 referees would come over. Did Boucher deserve that bullshit? Oh, of course not. But is Forbes a dirty player? Well, of course not. But Don Cherry would work up his players. We all know that. And that the thing is, in hockey, once you make a mistake physically, you can't go back. Look at the Ted Green-Mackey case. You got Wilt Pema, Ciccarelli, Boom taking a freak about that young player. I think Boucher should have got a bigger monetary judgment because it took away a big earning in his career. He could have played another 10 years, give or take. And that would be what? At 100 to 125,000 per. So, I mean, anyway. But check out his website, check out his books. And Boucher is a dynamite mind for hockey if you ever a chance to talk to him. I've seen published reports and YouTube interviews. Very cool and very smart cat. Very proud of his First Nation. He's a Ojibwe heritage. And, you know, a role model to us all. And we miss his headbands, if you know what I'm talking about. Have a good day. Bye.